Welcome back to Stratagames. I'm Andrew, and this is 9 great cards for Commander you aren't playing. Invasion Edition. Invasion came out in the fall of 2000, and its focus on multicolored themes, fantastic limited environment, and introduction of kicker, domain, and split cards has made it one of the most acclaimed Magic sets in history. But it's kinda old now, so you may not know which Invasion cards you're missing out on. Domain wanted you to play as many basic land types as possible, and what better way to incentivize you than with the threat of force? Global Ruin costs 4 white for a sorcery with, each player chooses from the lands they control a land of each basic land type, then sacrifices the rest. This is a mass land destruction spell that effectively lets players keep only as many lands as there are colors in their commander's identity. For many decks, that's still only 2 or 3. If you've planned for this by running a good amount of colors and or mana artifacts, you can give yourself a massive mana advantage. Our blue invader is Psychic Battle. This enchantment costs 3 blue and says, whenever a player chooses 1 or more targets, each player reveals the top card of their library. The player who reveals the card with the highest mana value may change the target or targets. If 2 or more cards are tied for the highest, the target or targets remain unchanged. Changing targets this way doesn't trigger abilities of permanents, names, psychic, blah 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 blah. So basically, whenever anyone targets anything, you all clash and the winner gets to retarget. If you can ensure that you usually win, you control the table, because it can be really hard to bring down a powerful player if you can't target their stuff. Obviously, this is only going to work well in decks that have a lot of expensive cards, but you can increase your consistency by running Sensei's Divining Top and modal double-face lands. Have you ever wanted to play Rule of Law on just yourself? Now you can! Yawgmoth's Agenda costs 3 black for an enchantment with, you can't cast more than 1 spell each turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard, and if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So this just turns your graveyard into a second hand.
Almost. There are a few provisos, a couple of quid pro quos.
The best way to deal with these provisos is to build your deck so that it plays at instant speed. Yeah, you can only cast 1 spell per turn, but if you utilize each player's turn, who cares? You probably weren't going to play more than 4 spells on your own turn anyway. Now I know we already did one of these, but Invasion has a lot of land destruction, and it's hard to find comparable effects nowadays because WotC no longer prints nearly as much of it. Something about fun or, I don't know, some garbage like that. Shivan Harvest costs 1 red for an enchantment with 1 red, sacrifice a creature, destroy target non-basic land. I mean, that about says it all. You can punish players who get too greedy with their mana base at the low cost of 2 mana and an expendable. As with last week's Ooze Garden, this enchantment gets even better with treason effects, allowing you to destroy a land and a creature all at once. Scouting Trek costs 1 green for a sorcery that reads, search your library for any number of basic land cards, reveal those cards, then shuffle and put them on top. Okay, so it's not amazing ramp by any means, but it does work well with cards that let you play additional lands, and that let you play lands from the top of your deck. And it guarantees consistent landfall triggers, so if you're already playing a lot of these effects, this may be worth trying out. And bonus points if you can follow it up with a treasure hunt. Friends help each other out, and Overabundance lets me help out my friends in EDH. It costs 1 red-green for an enchantment with, whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced, and Overabundance deals 1 damage to the player. See? Sharing is caring. So this doubles everyone's mana at the cost of 1 life per land tapped. Now that's going to seem real good for your opponents the first time they tap out to cast an Eldrazi Titan, but the damage is going to add up fast, and there's no way to turn it off. You can circumvent the damage you take with this by running a lot of mana rocks, and you should also make sure to include a lot of answers to the things your opponents might be throwing out for cheap. Lastly, it's helpful to have some burn to get those last points of damage in. This is a great way to sit back and let your opponents Darwin themselves. Sabos Web costs 2 for an artifact with, when Sabos Web enters the battlefield, draw a card. And each land with an activated ability that isn't a mana ability doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. So this is a different form of land destruction. It's not as permanent because if the web ever leaves the battlefield, those lands come back. But it's cheap, replaces itself, and can lock down triomes, utility lands, and fetch lands that haven't been played yet. Naturally, you'll want to avoid running those lands with this card. Like Shivan Harvest, I would want Sabos Web if my meta is very greedy with their mana base. Cards like these are the reason people are supposed to play more basic lands, but if nobody ever actually plays these effects, it lets everyone else get away with murder. If your opponents aren't destroying your lands fast enough, you can do it to yourself with Geothermal Crevice. This land enters the battlefield tapped, taps to add red, or taps and sacrifices to add black-green. Now, generally, sacrificing your lands is a bad plan, but it does provide you with a burst of mana, which can be useful to get your commander or another powerful spell out a turn early. While there's a whole cycle of these lands in Invasion, Geothermal Crevice is the best one because it fits in the types of decks that care about sacrificing or having lands in your graveyard. So while this isn't an auto-include in all Jund decks, there are definitely some great places where it should see more play. If you thought we didn't have enough 5-drop enchantments in this list, you're wrong. Our number one card from Invasion that people need to play more of in Commander is Spreading Plague, which costs 4 black and says, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, destroy all other creatures that share a color with it. They can't be regenerated. So this card board wipes every time a creature hits the battlefield. Constantly board wiping is amazing. You can capitalize on this in 2 opposite ways. First, if you play creatures that have a lot of colors, you can maximize the amount of stuff you'll destroy when they enter. Or you can play colorless creatures because they're immune to the plague and won't die no matter what creature enters the battlefield. This card combos with Revel in Riches or other similar cards that care about creatures dying. And it gets better in Super Friends because it vastly reduces the number of creatures that can hurt your friends. These are our favorite picks from Invasion, but let us know which cards you think are undervalued. And be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you'd like to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching.